Okay, here we go. Welcome to another rendition of Poking the Bear. I wanted to follow up on my last video in response to a talk that was given at the Right Response Ministries by Auron. Again, hopefully I'm not pronouncing that wrong. Sorry if I am. MacIntyre, who talked about elite theory and the new Christian right. And here was just a response to that video from somebody who apparently said I didn't get it. So just wanted to respond to this in response to the whole video. So let's see here. He quotes me saying that I don't get it. He says, "Correct, Matt, you don't get it. Not at all. Auron was not defending the U.S. Constitution in any way, shape, or form. Did you even listen to Auron's opening statements about it? Do you even know Auron is a monarchist? Do you even understand? Do you understand Auron has been saying the U.S. Constitution is completely dead? Do you understand he was making a comparison between today and when the nation was founded and why the U.S. Constitution seemingly worked at our founding?" So the opening statements that Auron made were kind of a tongue-in-cheek type of thing, looking back at his life of growing up in the SBC. There was no negative comments about it. They were all favorable about the Constitution, and leading into kind of what he goes into with the whole talk, how that Constitution relates to powers, people being in power, what needs to be behind that, the Constitution, essentially. So his whole comments at the beginning statements were in favor of it. We're completely in favor. There was nothing against the Constitution in what he said at the beginning at all. And this person says he was not defending the U.S. Constitution in any way, shape, or form. Maybe not in one respect, but he was defending the fact that we need to reanimate that. And that goes to this other statement where it said, do you understand Auron has been saying the U.S. Constitution is completely dead? Maybe he has. I don't know. But what he said in this talk was to reanimate it with the Christian traditions, the Christian beliefs that were behind the Constitution to begin with. And that's essentially what we need to establish, is those structures in life that fueled the Constitution in the first place, that were behind it in the first place. And the main one that emphasizes the Christian faith is the church as the structure that was behind the Constitution and all the Christian traditions behind it. So his whole point is that we essentially need to reanimate that because of the problems that have happened with the wrong powers taking over and distorting the Constitution, when the Constitution is supposed to be the checks and balances to keep them in check and restrict the power. That has changed because of these people who have been in power. And so what we need to do, part of it, is that we need to reanimate the Constitution with the traditions and beliefs that were behind it in the first place. That's his points. So do you know Auron is a monarchist? That's really irrelevant. It doesn't matter whether he believes that or not, because I'm going to play a snippet from Stephen Wolf's talk at that same conference about the Christian Prince. It doesn't matter if they're a monarchist. Maybe he is, but the Constitution plays a big part in that. And that's his whole point, is that we need to reanimate it again with the beliefs and the traditions that were behind it. And I'm going to play a couple snippets from him again. And so he was comparing what seemingly worked at the founding because of what was behind the Constitution again, and comparing that to today and what's going on today, and the need for us to establish these structures back in life. And the main emphasis was the fact that what he thinks is we need to establish what was behind the Constitution to begin with, reanimate it. So whether he thinks it was completely dead or not, what does it mean to reanimate something, to bring it back to life? This was what he was saying. So, I mean, here's even a clip from here.
And so if we're going to be effective in that kind of environment, we need to understand how these foxes came to power, but we also need to understand why the Constitution did not stop them from manipulating the system that we love. And so we need to ask ourselves the question, did the Constitution not work? Is there something wrong with the Constitution? Or is there something we don't understand about the Constitution? And my answer is the last one. I don't think it's that the Constitution failed. I think it's that we failed to understand. We lost connection with the tradition as to why our Constitution was supposed to defend our rights.
See?
Ultimately, we kind of believed that the Constitution would do the work for us. We just kind of had to go sit and grill somewhere and then enjoy the freedoms and liberties that our founders had secured through the Constitution. But the thing is that the founders never believed that the Constitution by itself would guarantee your freedom. The paper the Constitution is written on is not magic. It's just paper. What made it powerful is the people behind it, the traditions behind it, the beliefs behind it.
It's right here. He's talking favorably about the Constitution and what was behind it in the first place that we need to bring back, essentially. The beliefs, the power, the people behind it, the traditions behind it, and reanimate it so that we have the power, the checks and balances, and the restriction of power, supposedly, and all of that. He's talking favorably about the Constitution. Whether he's said it's dead or not, completely dead or not, that's really irrelevant to what he's saying now, because he's wanting to reanimate it. So maybe he said it was dead in the past because of what's been happening to it. And now he's adding on to that, continuing that thought of what needs to happen now. So, just listening over and over to that talk, there's anyway. Here's what Stephen Wolfe says in his talk about the Christian prince and what part of what he means by the Christian prince.
So some people have suggested that this prince of mine is a man of absolute power, unhindered in action. But this is really what I'd call a universalist projection, stated by those who lack any conception of a particular people with their own political tradition and constitution. The prince is a man of a people for those people. He is bound by a way of life. So I'm not calling for a return to monarchy, nor to some ancient conception of dictatorship, nor to a 16th century Geneva. I know some of you might want some of that, but that's not what I'm saying. So every people has a constitution. Every people has a constitution. It's either written or it's unwritten. And that is, it is a political architecture that limits and directs absolute power, or abstract power, excuse me. It limits and directs power in the abstract. So in ordinary circumstances, this prince that I've described is bound by his way of life. or I should say the people bind him to it.
So there is another favorable statement for the Constitution, whether it's in a monarchy type of situation with someone at the head. The person at the head is the people, or he is bound by the people are for him, and everyone has a constitution, and so Constitution is upheld. Constitution wants to be, we want to reanimate it, apparently, and so quite interesting and stuff to think about. But just responding to some of those comments that really are not even close to what they were saying. Just interesting stuff. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about is the T. Russell Hunter and Jon Speed debate versus Doug Wilson and Joe Rigney. Interesting debate, good debate in some respects about some of the key issues. But one thing that was brought up from Joe Rigney, he brought it up first, but then they both kind of brought it back up again throughout. Brought up the example of what he thought the example of how we ought to base our writing legislation. He based it on the texts about divorce from Deuteronomy 24, Matthew 19, which is also in Mark 10. And I wanted to just pull out a couple of points because essentially that text and how he was trying to use it does not apply to this issue at all. And so one is that that reference to those texts about divorce, it doesn't apply to at all to legislation, because the original context that Deuteronomy 24 is in the judicial context. That's the judicial law, the civil law, the moral law applied to situations, a situation that would happen within society. And that moral law that was applied to the situation is the seventh commandment about adultery. That's the focus. That's what it's about. It's not ultimately and primarily about divorce and whether one can divorce or not. And we'll get to that in a second. But it first of all has nothing to do with legislation and writing legislation, because it's in the judicial context. Deuteronomy 24 is a description of how to handle a judicial case if something happens. So if this situation happens in your society, in your community, then this is how you deal with it. This is the ramifications of what is transpiring in a situation like that. If someone writes a certificate of divorce and if they go and remarry in that situation. So it's not even about divorce. It's about adultery. It's about the ramifications of divorce if that happens and if you remarry that situation. So there was things to think about here. Judicial context. There was not even civil. There wasn't even a civil law about divorce itself and forbidding it, especially with any punishment that makes it a crime. So it was an abiding command from God not to divorce that was rooted in creation and in an institution of marriage that should not be separated. And so in that context, as God commands to not divorce, to not be separate, that is a sin. But that didn't mean a divorce wouldn't happen. Divorce didn't happen within the community. But if it did, there wasn't any civil law against it. There wasn't any punishment attached to it for divorce itself. Now, if it continued on with a remarriage and what the ramifications of that was, then that got into the civil law and the judicial context of how to deal with that. So if divorce happened, then it would be dealt with within a judicial context when it came to remarriage, when it came to whether there was an adultery happening because of the remarriage. So this is a heavier situation because it's directly targeting the seventh commandment, that you shall not commit adultery. So since it was not a crime, then it is in the realm of sin that ought to be dealt with within the church, by the church, which means even more that this isn't applicable at all to abortion. It's not even really in the context of that civil law in the civil government sense, with a crime attached to it and a punishment attached to it, because divorce itself wasn't the primary part of that judicial law in Deuteronomy 24. Again, it was about adultery. So from this, it doesn't even apply at all to abortion, because it's about adultery. Abortion is about the sixth commandment, thou shalt not murder. Deuteronomy 24 is about the seventh commandment, thou shalt not commit adultery. So they're totally two different things, especially when you look at the context of legislation, the idea of legislation, the concept that he was arguing for of how to model creating and making legislation, making law. It's not even in that context to begin with, let alone it's not even about divorce that they were talking about primarily. It's not about divorce. It's about adultery and all of that. So two completely different things. So you can't apply one to the other. And so even when you are looking at Matthew 19, again, this is where he went with it to justify the creation of legislation. And so Matthew 19, verse 8, Jesus said, because of your hardness of heart, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. Mark 10:5, because of your hardness of heart, he wrote you this commandment. So again, looking back at that original text of Deuteronomy 24 that was being referred to, it was God writing the commandment. It's God's legislation, not man's. This is God's law. His moral law applied to civil situations, societal situations. It was the seventh commandment applied to the situation that if someone divorced and they remarried, in certain situations, what would that mean? So if in verse 9 in Matthew 19, and I say to you, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery. So there's the situation that if someone divorces his wife and remarries, what's the situation? If you divorce your wife for any other reason than for her sexual immorality, and you marry someone else, then you are committing adultery. That's what it's talking about. If you divorce your wife because of her sexual immorality, because if she does commit sexual immorality, and you marry someone else, you are not committing adultery by doing so, by remarrying, because the reason for your divorce was for sexual immorality. So that's not saying that divorce is permitted. That's not the focus of the text. That's not the focus of the text. The focus of the text is the ramifications if divorce happens, and if it happens for the reason of sexual immorality or not sexual immorality. And so it's about whether you commit adultery or not. That's what it's about. It's not about whether you can divorce or whether there are legitimate grounds for divorce, really. So should this be even valid in the debate? No, not at all, for those reasons that I just gave. One, again, in the judicial context, it's not about making legislation at all. This is God's legislation applied to a specific situation in the judicial context. And it's not, it cannot be applied to a situation of abortion because it's about adultery. Rigney says this: Jesus accommodated for human sinfulness in permitting and regulating divorce. But again, he's missing the whole point of the text itself, what it's primarily about. Divorce is not the issue, the ultimate issue. The issue is remarriage and adultery, with the context of if a divorce happens. So obviously divorce is a part of it, but it's not the main focus of it. It's not what it's really about. It's about whether someone commits adultery or not. So again, it's not a valid point to bring up. And it is no defense at all for the incremental approach to abolishing abortion. That is not valid application at all. Something else he says is Reformed political philosophy as a whole has always budgeted for this reality, having principles and ideals, and then recognizing that politics is the wise and prudential pursuit of justice in a world filled with human hardness of heart, which we need to accommodate and allow for in the pursuit of those good ends. But as they are defending for the run all the plays mentality, that's not a reason for running all the plays. That's not a reason that to think and approach fighting abortion in the mentality like if this is what we got, then let's take what we can get. It's not a reason at all for running all the plays. And further, what he says about this political philosophy and all of that's just another reason for non-legislative theonomy, because it's God's legislation. God's legislation is sufficient. With knowing and using God's law intentionally in its purposes for society, and its purposes for sin, its purposes for salvation and sanctification. These are incredibly important issues of how God's law is to be used in those ways. Used as, and this again, coming back to this constantly, the use of God's law as a restraint, as a mirror, as a path. That's the wise and prudential pursuit of justice in a world filled with the human hardness of heart, which we need to accommodate for and allow for in the pursuit of those good ends. Any other way, without the use of God's law as he has prescribed it to be used, it is not just. It is not wise. He's given the wisdom. He's explained the wise way to pursue justice, to execute justice, to establish justice. He's given the wise way to do that. And so it's not taking what we can get. It's not running all the plays. It's being faithful to the Word of God and using what God has provided for us to use within our societies. And so to even think about who Doug Wilson is, and this was a comment that was made that I want to reiterate to Doug himself, that if you actually want abolition like you say you do, and that's your end goal, then why don't you get involved in crafting that? Why? I mean, think about the influence that this man has. You are enough of an influencer that you could be involved in that. You know the influence that you have. You know it. So why not? Why not craft, if you're for legislation, why not craft bills of abolition? I would say go even further, that we need to establish God's law, because God's law is sufficient for these things, as I mentioned before. We need to understand the context of Scripture and what it's actually talking about. But think about it. Think about the influence that this man has. I mean, think about how many people were looking to him during the COVID nonsense and the response to the government nonsense. Think about the influence. Think about what can be accomplished. I mean, you want to run all the plays. Well, how about have this one be the first one? How about that one be the play that you go to? And that be the thing that you're involved in. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense of why you're not. You say you're for them. You say you tweet in support of them or whatever, but why don't you just be on the front lines with it? Why don't you be involved in that issue up front? So a lot of this is on the issue of legislation and the questions that come with legislation and things like that. And I would ask people to really, really think about that. Really think about study the Scriptures, what it says, what God prescribed, what God instituted, what God set forth. And even, again, we've talked about this before on this podcast, on other podcasts, through Future of Christendom. Even when you get into the king, what was the king supposed to do? What was the king's job in the use of God's law? It was never established to make law, never prescribed to make law. God set up the judicial system, and it carried over to the kings when he allowed the kings to be a thing after the grumbling of the Israelites. He allowed them to have the king, but the duty of that high authority, that magistrate, did not change. It stayed in the judicial context. And it was brought back and instituted when the people of God came back to be faithful. It was instituted and reestablished. That was what God set up. So this is something that we ought to really, really think about. Really, really examine in our day, because there is so much about legislation. There's so much about needing to. We just need to get another law passed, well, whatever it may be, in any issue that we face in our society. We just need to get another law passed, and this will probably go into the episode that we're going to do. Me and Joel Saint are going to start doing a podcast together as well, in addition to this. And this is my solo one or whatever, I guess. But we're gonna talk about the relationship of democracy and law, and things that we ought to really think about. And I'll just pose this question to those who are listening and in looking ahead to that first episode of the podcast that we're going to do, which is called The Offensive and Foolish Podcast with Joel Saint and Matt Kenitzer. So it'll be, hopefully you look forward to that and watch it, listen to it. But the question I'll pose here is our current system, is the system that we've had established, the democratic system, with the creation of legislation, the creation of law, is that really sustainable for our society? Especially when we look at it from the viewpoint of a Christian who wants to be faithful to God, who wants righteous law, who wants God's will to be done in society, who wants God to be honored and obeyed. Is our current system, the way it's set up in different things like term limits, executive orders, other things like that, which we'll get into, is it sustainable? Is that the stable structure that we ought to look to? What would happen in 2 years? What would happen in 4 years? What would happen at the next couple of changes of presidents? Things to really think about, because it applies to these issues that I'm bringing up here, whether it be the Constitution in the previous episode, and what the Constitution actually lays out, and what it actually gives, what kind of power it gives to the government, and the different branches of the government. And then also here about dealing with abortion, the most wicked situation in our nation, that is bringing the judgment of God on this nation and is continuing to do that. It hasn't changed. It's actually gotten worse. And so the whole question of legislation is a major part of that. A major part of that. And so we even just listening to that debate between these guys, that question has to come up. It has to come up. And the support, the defense that Joe and Doug were giving has no grounding at all in any debate about abortion, because there's no relevance, there's no connection, there's no applicability from what they say from Deuteronomy 24, Matthew 19, and also Mark 10 about those things that have to do with divorce, and then primarily remarriage and whether adultery happens. That's the issue. So that is not cannot be applied to abortion. Whether you're thinking about it legislatively, or whether you're thinking about it just in terms of whether it applies to abortion, the situation of abortion or not. There's no application at all. No valid application at all. And this is what we really need to think about. And thankfully, these debates are happening. Thankfully, people are talking about it. And this is why we pose these questions to you. This is why I talk about this stuff. This is why we are talking about and promoting what we believe the scriptures to teach, which I think it's very clear once you study it and follow the trajectory of scripture and what God institutes. And so hopefully this is helpful. Hopefully this is things that make you think, that really make you start asking some questions about vital issues of our life, our society. And so, again, hopefully this was beneficial to you. And hopefully you will listen more in the future to other episodes of this podcast, Poking the Bear, and then also the podcast that will be coming out within a couple of weeks. Got some things that have delayed it a little bit on my end of just getting some things set up. But we look forward to doing a Joel St. Matt Kenitzer podcast called the Offensive and Foolish podcast. So hopefully you look forward to that. Go to, if you're in the area of Pennsylvania, central Pennsylvania, eastern Pennsylvania, go to futureofchristendom.org. We are hosting a family conference in a couple weeks, June 21st, at the church that I pastor, St. John's Reformed Church. It'll be a day conference. It'll be outside. Hopefully there will be no rain. But it'll be a great time of good fellowship and good sessions about family, about what the scriptures say about certain aspects of family. So we're really looking forward to that. I would love to see people register for that and come and hang out. And then also look forward to July 18th and 19th, the Abolish Abortion Pennsylvania fundraiser campout and conference. We would love to see also another good turnout for that. Really good time to just hang out and talk about abortion, talk about things of abolition, talk about how all of Scripture really speaks to how we deal with these things and all of life. So looking forward to that as well. So please go register at that website, which is abolishchildsacrifice.com. So we're looking forward to those things coming up. So hopefully you are too. Get registered for those things. And so we appreciate the support. And if you're wanting to dive into a lot of this stuff about legislation and things like that, go get my book as well. In accordance with the glorious gospel, the use of God's law in society. Go get it at futureofchristendom.org, and I hope to put some more stuff out in the near future. I'm working on a commentary, expositional commentary, as I'm preaching through 1st and 2nd Peter. So look forward to that as well. But thanks for watching, and we will see you later. Kind of see you later. Virtually, I guess. I don't know. But check you later.
When Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, "Is it you troubler of Israel?" And he answered, "I have not troubled Israel, but you have, in your father's house, because you have abandoned the commandments of the Lord and followed the Baals."
I was a little embarrassed, I said.
I was a little embarrassed, I said.